Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's session. Today, we'll talk about strategic human resource management in HR analytics in terms of strategic alignment. In other words, what can we do to use the data properly and in terms of the strategy of the organization to achieve organizational goals in every single department. So what is strategy? Strategy is a well-devised and thoughtful plan for achieving any objective that the department sets, the organization sets, or the leaders basically set for the entire organization. So strategy can be paired with data analytics to make data-driven decisions that are based on evidence. Strategy can be private or public, and you can think about companies like Disney World, Coca-Cola, IBM, Tesla, Google, Apple, in terms of their strategies. What are their strategies, and do they share them with the public or just with their employees internally? So formulating a strategy requires decision-making regarding the mission, the vision, the values, strategy type, as well as analyzing both the internal as well as the external environments of the organization, while also identifying the specific objectives regarding stakeholder satisfaction. So once you identify or define exactly what those specific objectives are to satisfy stakeholders, then you can begin the process. So once you've identified the mission, the vision, and values, you analyze both the internal and external environments of the organization, otherwise known as the SWOT analysis, to identify the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for the organization. Then you pick a strategy type. So you determine whether you want to have a differentiation strategy, a cost leadership strategy, or be more focused, have a niche market for your product or service. So once you've determined or selected your strategy type, then you specifically define the objectives to satisfy your stakeholders, and finally, you implement the strategy. So strategic human resource management is the process of aligning human resource policies and practices with the objectives of the organization, which includes the employee, operational, stakeholder, and financial outcomes. So the strategic HRM is the process of aligning HR policies and practices with the objectives of the organization, which would include employee, operational, stakeholder, and financial outcomes as relevant in the organization. Now, if we look at it historically, traditionally, human resource professionals and departments have spent a lot more time on transactional activities, not so much on transformational activities for the organization. But, that was then. Now we are at a stage in human resource department in modern companies to where we are spending more time on transformational activities. So we're spending less time on transactional activities, more on transformational activities. That's why aligning the human resource management department with the overall strategic objectives of the organization becomes critical. One of the things we need to understand is the high performance work practices for developing human capital capabilities requires certain scientific methodologies. So there are many steps that you can take. First of all, you need to create employment security policies to encourage employee involvement and commitment in order to develop human capital capabilities for your organization. Second, you need to select and hire new employees based on the objectives of the organization to create a highly qualified workforce that are a good fit for your organization's culture. Third, organize employees into self-managed teams to achieve high-performing goals. Self-managed teams to achieve high-performance goals. Fourth, compensate employees based on performance to attract, to motivate, to retain these talented employees. Remember, the goal is to sustain any advantage you might have through your human resource management. So if you bring good people in, You need to not only keep them at high levels of motivation, but you need to retain them for as long as possible. Fifth, you can train your employees to enhance their knowledge and skills which are necessary for high performance. That means we need to analyze these jobs and know the market and know what skills and competencies are relevant at any given time so we can provide that to our employees. Remember, talented employees stay knowledgeable only for so long because knowledge duplicates and triples and quadruples very quickly, so we need to keep them updated. Six would be to reduce status differences between employees and managers to leverage their ideas, their skills, and effort at all levels, whether they are high-level managers, middle-level managers, entry-level managers, employees, or just stakeholders outside of your organization that are critical to the success of your company. And finally, share information on strategy and performance to motivate employees and to contribute to the overall well-being of the organization. So knowledge sharing and knowledge management are critical as long as they are shared in a timely manner with all relevant stakeholders in the organization. So human resource analytics has many components associated with it, starting from collecting, analyzing, interpreting, and reporting people-related data in order to make improvements and achieve departmental and organizational objectives. Our jobs as human resource professionals would be to integrate data analytics into the HR functions and make them available throughout the organization for professionals and managers to make decisions for the future. We need to convince all leaders and professionals about the value of the scientific process in data analytics. I want to talk about 3 different levels of HR analytics. That would be descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive analytics. So what are these 3 elements? Well, descriptive analytics simply provide you the summary statistics such as the sums, the means, and the percentages so everybody can see them readily or visually. Predictive analytics is about the statistical and computational models that show patterns in terms of where we have been, where we have been going, and where we're likely to go in the weeks, months, and years to come. Prescriptive analytics are what actions should be taken based on what is likely to happen in the near future or far into the future. Again, all of that is based on what is predicted from past data and where we were likely to go in the years to come, assuming nothing changes. Now think about the analytic process being used on a day-to-day basis. So for example, if you want to lose a few pounds, you need to be mindful and figure out what is it that has been causing your extra weight, right? So if you go to a nutritionist, you have to describe basically what you've been eating, what you've been doing, how active you have been. So that is the description phase of the analytical process. You describe what you have been eating, what you've been doing, how much walking, how much running, how much exercise you've been getting. So based on what you have described to your nutritionist, she or he would basically make some predictions, right? If you don't make some changes, you'll continue to gain the same amount of weight over the next month, 2 months, 3 months, and years. However, if you do make some changes, then you can lose some weight. You might have to do different activities. So this is where eventually, based on what you've described, based on her predictions, she will go into the 3rd phase of analytic HR or analytics in general. That would be to provide you a prescription of what to do over the coming weeks, months, and year in order to achieve your goal. So in this case, she or he will prescribe basically how much walking you need to do, how many calories you need to eat every single day, and any other activities that he or she deems appropriate based on your background, your health, and also what you have described to him or her, right? So that's how the process works. Now let's assume that you are sick. You ate some food and it doesn't feel good. The same thing would be true, God forbid you become sick and you have to go to your doctor. You describe what you ate last night or for lunch that made you sick with all of your friends. Maybe it's too much food, maybe something was wrong with the food, right? So you have to describe basically what made you ill, what made you sick. Based on what you describe to your medical doctor, he or she might also ask you to do some lab work. So based on the lab results, then he or she would make some prediction what your illness might be, what virus might have caused your illness or your pain. So at that time, he or she would make some predictions about what your illness is and eventually provide a prescription for you. So you take those medications or you avoid certain foods for a few days and eventually your pain will go away. So the same analytic process that we described in losing weight, exercising, or becoming healthier when we're sick also applies in the workplace when it comes to human resource departments. So the analytic process in HR is that you describe the current process of hiring candidates, for example, how you've been hiring, how you've been interviewing people, what kinds of universities are you targeting, and what kinds of applicants are actually applying. Then you make some predictions in terms of legal and ethical issues regarding unfair and illegal impact or disparate impact or unfair impact on specific categories of people based on their race, based on gender, age, etc. So now if you have been having a lot of legal lawsuits and you continue the same pattern of hiring practices, you'll probably end up with similar types of lawsuits in the future. On the other hand, if you sort of discover basically what might change the status quo, then you can go back and have an intervention. So this is what, as experts, as human resource professionals, as consultants, you would basically make a prescription. In other words, you prescribe a new process, new training materials, and new ways of hiring people in order to have a different outcome. So always keep track of data after you have implemented the new process to compare the before and after. In any scientific process, you identify the problem, you do background research, you form a hypothesis, you test the hypothesis with experimentation by having a control group or control data in some cases. You analyze the data and you communicate the findings to the relevant parties in order for them to use this data to make forecasts for the future or to prescribe what should be done in the future. So there are many benefits to HR measurements and metrics. Remember that what gets measured gets done. So people will know exactly what to focus on and take responsibility for in their jobs. So measure, 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 and let people know how they are doing and what they need to do to achieve their goals. Factual content information are always necessary for continuous learning and progressive goals in any department at the individual level or team level or organizational level. Remember that measurements quantify as well as clarify the overall value of your work, your team's work, your department's work. Metrics and measurements guide workforce strategies for the future. Metrics and measurements also maximize human resource department's return on investment. It also shows what HR contributes to the business results. And finally, metrics and measurements make the business case for the human resource department's objectives or your team's overall objectives. Now, there are some challenges associated with measurements and metrics as well. Some people will tell you that their jobs cannot be measured. What they do are not quantifiable. And that might be true, but it's your job to figure out how to measure it qualitatively or quantitatively. Nonetheless, there are always going to be methods of measuring the numbers, measuring successes of individuals and their output. The purpose of measurement sometimes is not clear. That is another challenge. They're also going to be fear that the outcomes will be used to terminate employees, to demote employees. So that becomes a huge challenge. in terms of whether people accept or support the change. So mining data from several departments or platforms might also be very time consuming. So some managers and some departments may not cooperate with each other. Therefore, data mining or collection might be a little bit more difficult. It also might be very difficult to understand and analyze the data because you and I may not have the relevant skills, especially when it comes to psychological or statistical methodologies that are required to analyze the data correctly. Also, data can be used to draw the wrong conclusions or faulty conclusions. So there are challenges, and we need to be mindful and humble enough to acknowledge that it's not a perfect science, so we can learn and make it better. That's the goal. In HR analytics, we can use simple to complex statistical tools to identify a relationship between two sets of variables or data to help address certain trends, certain problems, and also to make talent decisions or decisions regarding the human capital for your organization. Across the industry, many HR organizations have been very, very slow to adopt analytics because of fears, because of not being able to collect the data, because of lack of cooperation, because of lack of expertise. Nonetheless, in today's environment, we need to collect the data, we need to have measurements, and we need to have metrics in place in order to make improvements and data-driven decisions. HR analytics can help identify trends and solve many business-related problems and to take advantage of opportunities. If you have employee turnover or is very high, you obviously need to collect data. Why are we having high employee turnover? However, before you can do any of those things, you need to have good data or collect data in order to watch for the trends. So how do you get started? Well, find a manager, entrepreneur, or leader in the organization that has a problem or opportunity that he or she wants to work on. Persuade that leader to let you use analytics to solve that problem or to take advantage of the opportunity. Figure out what metrics and outcomes may be relevant predictors, and then collect the data for that over a week period, over a month period, or a quarter period, or a year, depending on how often or how long you are able to work with that organization or that leader. Create a combined score based on a regression formula that predicts the desired outcome. If they continue doing exactly what they have been doing, what would be the outcome in the next quarter, in the next month, in the next week? And then you can initiate some sort of intervention based on what you have learned from the data analysis and measure the change once you implement the new suggested process. You can also ask for resources to build an analytics team in your department. Get management buy-in, because if the executives and managers and finance department, IT department, HR department does not own this, they're not going to help you collect the data. So make sure they have buy-in or that they own the analytics process. As always, you need to build a reputation for being an objective, analytic, and a rational decision maker at all times. So you can do this by analyzing the numbers, by analyzing the data, and analyzing all of the facts surrounding every situation to make evidence-based decisions. Good luck.